So today I'm going to be showing you how you can make a full-time passive income, as well as how I personally make a full-time passive income from DeFi Liquidity as a Service, also known as LAS. Pretty simple. Now, liquidity as a service is a pretty interesting concept, and you may have heard of topics like SaaS, which is software as a service. That requires you going and spending tens of thousands of dollars building out a software program, or of course just building it out yourself, but spending literally hundreds of hours building out a software. And that's what we did over at Metrics Finance. We have an in-house team to build out a software, and that's our service, right? We sell a subscription model for it. You can also do other as a service models, like there are, say, Amazon as a service, and that's one of the passive income things. But in reality, with Amazon as a service, what you have to do is go out and buy a bunch of inventory, and you have to take a huge upfront risk that you might not make back, and then, worst case scenario, sell all your inventory at a discount. Well, with liquidity as a service, it's actually quite different, because the best part about this is it's an investment, and that investment is not a sunk cost. As if we were going and buying a bunch of Apple stock right now, we can sell that the next day if we really needed to or we really wanted to. Well, liquidity as a service is arguably more flexible because it's in the cryptocurrency industry, which means we are using our already existing cryptocurrency assets, or we can go out and buy different cryptocurrency assets. Now, with that being said, not only are we using cryptocurrency assets, we can be using good, solid cryptocurrency assets, not random crypto assets. So that means we can use stuff like ETH, we can use stuff like WBTC, or just Bitcoin in general. We can use stuff like Link and just any other crypto asset that's in a liquidity pool, which typically is going to be about 75% of cryptocurrency assets out there, and that number is only growing. But basically, the whole concept of liquidity as a service is we have capital that's being held in cryptocurrency assets. So let's just say this right here is our crypto asset bag, and we are putting that capital into a liquidity pool, which in theory is allowing people to execute trades on decentralized exchanges, which means that we are going to be paid for allowing that service. So we already have the capital, we're investing that capital into a liquidity pool, and then from there, traders will come into this liquidity pool. They will trade one asset for another asset, basically. So maybe they're trading Ethereum for USDC. And then since we put that capital in the liquidity pool, they are going to pay a small fee, which is going to go back to us over here. It's a pretty simple concept, right? You are essentially putting your capital in liquidity pools. In return, you are taking the other end of a trade. So if somebody wanted to come in and trade one Ethereum for, let's just say, 1,000 USDC, which would put the price of Ethereum at $1,000 basically. From a liquidity provider standpoint, we are gaining one Ethereum and we are losing 1,000 USDC. But here's the thing, right? They're going to pay us a small fee. So typically, instead of losing 1,000 USDC, we might only lose like 999 USDC. And in that instance, that extra dollar that we gained in terms of Ethereum, that's the fee that we're collecting for being a liquidity provider. So we are basically taking the other end of a trade, which means if a bunch of people are buying up Ethereum and the price of Ethereum is going up, well then guess what? The amount of Ethereum that we have in our liquidity pool is going down. So our asset ratios can fluctuate. Even if we start with 50-50 of assets, like 50% Ethereum and 50% USDC, we could end up with 60-70, we could end up with 80-20, we can end up with 20-80, we can end up all over the board, or we can end up with 100% of one asset. Now, with liquidity as a service, there are a couple different concepts in here that kind of fall under this category, and you guys have probably heard of these different concepts. The first one is going to be liquidity mining. Now, liquidity mining is essentially what I just described to you, where you have that liquidity pool where traders are able to execute trades through that liquidity pool, and in return, you're being paid a fee as a liquidity provider because you put both assets in that liquidity pool, allowing trades to be executed. This is a pretty simple concept. Now, I want to dive into the as a service part, right? Because who is this service, this S right here, being provided to basically? Well, in this instance of liquidity mining, that service is provided to the trader because you're allowing them to trade through this liquidity pool, right? And typically with liquidity mining, you're going to be on exchanges like Uniswap and stuff along those lines. And over on Uniswap, you're providing liquidity to permissionless smart contracts, which means that Uniswap itself, even though they're the Uniswap created smart contracts, they have no control over what happens to those smart contracts. They're permissionless because they're on the blockchain and they're in decentralized finance. So your service right here is to the trader because that's number one, who is paying you, and number two, that's exactly who's using your service. Now, when we dive into models like, let's just say, yield farming, it's a little bit different. And the reason why is because yes, we're running this exact same model where we have a liquidity pool, and then we have the liquidity provider that puts both assets in the liquidity pool. And then we have the traders that come along here and they actually execute trades. Except the only difference is typically yield farming is going to be with lower TVL decentralized exchanges. Some of those could be Aerodrome, others could include Ramses. Others could include PancakeSwap. It isn't as much yield farming. It's kind of a mix of liquidity mining and yield farming, which we'll talk about that as well. But basically, these are exchanges that are wanting to increase the amount of liquidity that they have on their decentralized exchange. So instead of the liquidity provider providing its service to the trader, basically, where the trader is paying them, liquidity provider is typically going to be providing its service to the decentralized exchange. Yes, they're still putting liquidity in the liquidity pool, but ultimately the decentralized exchange a lot of the times is going to pay the liquidity providers incentives, which is extra rewards in the form of, let's just say, stuff like Arrow token or Velo token or Ram token or Cake token, all these other reward tokens. Basically, that is going to the liquidity provider in this instance because the liquidity provider is putting capital on this decentralized exchange. And the reason why these decentralized exchanges want more capital on their platform is because that means that there's going to be more trading activity, and a lot of the times they'll get an additional fee from trading activity, or maybe they'll take a portion of the fees that are being collected. Basically, by them increasing their capital on the exchange, they're going to have more aggregators, which are the people that are routing trades to their decentralized exchange, which then makes them more money. So they'll create a token like Arrow, Cake token, Ram token, and they'll increase the amount of liquidity on their platform by providing that token as an additional incentive and giving out a very high APR. So as a liquidity provider, you have to be a little bit more cautious, and the reason why is because number one, you're going to be deploying into exchanges that have lower amounts of liquidity. Number two, you're going to be getting reward tokens, which means that you need to be selling off those reward tokens if you want to sell them off, or compounding the back end, or kind of following their model and staying in the ecosystem. Number three, you have to make sure those reward tokens are going to be consistent because they typically change on a day-by-day basis or a week-by-week basis. Now I want to talk about three different yield farming models, and these are kind of like the three most popular ones that I've seen. We have the Aerodrome / Velodrome model, we'll have the Ramses model, and then we'll also have the PancakeSwap and just normal like Merkle model, for example, basically. So first things first, Aerodrome. Aerodrome is a pretty interesting model, right? You still have the liquidity pool, you still have the provider, and that's the backbone behind all these different strategies. Liquidity provider puts capital in the liquidity pool. And then you also have the trader. In this instance, traders are still being able to execute trades through the liquidity pool. Their fees are going over here to voters, and then these voters are voting on where the incentives that the decentralized exchange provides, which liquidity pools those go to. So the decentralized exchange would actually pay the liquidity providers in incentive tokens, so we'll label that as R because that's a reward token, and then the fees are going to go over to the people that actually vote on where the incentives go. So the whole point is the decentralized exchange wants you to lock up their reward token and get a vote escrow token, and then you can go and use that voting power to vote where the incentives are directed, and when you do vote on those pools, you get the fees basically. So you keep the token as well as you keep the fees within the ecosystem, right? It's a pretty interesting model. Ramses kind of has a similar model, except about 80% of the fees are going to go over the voter. The other 20% of the fees are going to go over the liquidity provider. So basically what Ramses does is they give you a portion of the fees instead of giving them all the voters. That way, if you did want to end up compounding, you don't have to sell your reward tokens. You could just use that 20%. Or if you wanted to take profit, once again, you can use that 20% instead of having to sell your reward token. Or you can just take the reward tokens and take the fees and sell those both for cash if you really wanted to. There's nothing stopping you from doing that. Now, the PancakeSwap model, this is, in my opinion, probably the best model out there. And Merkle also has the same exact model, and those are kind of the two most popular platforms out there. Now, you'll have the liquidity pool, you'll have the liquidity provider. Once again, trading activity is being executed because the traders are trading through the liquidity pool. Now, this is where it becomes more like liquidity mining as opposed to yield farming, but it's still a type of yield farming. That's just where the trader is paying the fees directly to the liquidity provider, just like liquidity mining. But then you're getting additional incentives from the decentralized exchange. So PancakeSwap and Merkle, what they do is they give you additional incentives. They're not taking a portion of your fees that would typically go to you. They're not doing any of that. They're just giving you additional incentives for providing liquidity over on the decentralized exchange. So in my opinion, this right here is the best model, arguably better than liquidity mining. Because if you can get the liquidity mining return that you would normally get, right? Let's just say that's 50% APR on Ethereum to USDC. And then you can also get an additional 10, 20, 30% APR in the form of, let's just say, Cake token. And then you can go and stake that Cake token, or you could stake a portion of it, or you could just sell all of it or sell a portion of it, right? You have options there, and you are now making additional money just by yield farming. So that's one of the models that you can do as well. This right here all falls under the umbrella of liquidity as a service. It's a pretty interesting business model, and in my opinion, it's pretty easy to get into as long as you have the right support and the right people in your corner. Now, in just a second, I'm going to dive into how you can actually get started in liquidity as a service. But the first thing I want to mention is I founded a company known as Builder Wealth, where we help people get started in liquidity as a service and earn additional income so that way they can supplement their current 9-to-5 income, or that way they could eventually essentially quit their job because they have a full-time passive income stream through decentralized finance. I'm going to leave our website down below, but if you're just getting into this industry and this is like the first time you're hearing about this, I'm going to recommend that you check out our products page where we just have some cheap products that you can take a look at so we can help you out, get you started. And then from there, when you're actually ready to scale up your portfolio, or you already have a portfolio and you're really looking for that additional support, that's where our DeFi Legacy program comes into play, and you guys can check that out. Now, for getting started with liquidity as a service, if you want to look at everything that you can find for liquidity as a service, you're going to want to head over to DeFi Llama. Now, when you're on DeFi Llama, you're going to be greeted with over 10,000 different liquidity pools over here and just general DeFi opportunities. We need to start to narrow this down. So under the category, I like to clear everything and I like to select decentralized exchanges. This is going to show us stuff that is liquidity pools basically. And then from there, we can go over to TVL and start to put in specific requirements. Typically, I will start with a TVL minimum of $1 million just so I can track less pools. Like there's 1,000 pools here now. That's still a ton to look through. And then APY, I like to put above 15%. The reason why I use 15% is because occasionally there are going to be instances where DeFi Llama displays 16%. But when you dive into this might be a concentrated liquidity pool and you go with a tighter range and you end up getting 50% off of this, right? That's the thing about DeFi Llama. So that's where Metrics Finance comes into play, but Metrics Finance is specifically going to show you different liquidity mining opportunities. So over on Uniswap, QuickSwap, PancakeSwap, SushiSwap, Orca, Radium, and Velodrome and Aerodrome, we can take a look at the liquidity mining opportunities over here to see what type of returns we can get. This is only factoring in concentrated liquidity. So getting started, the best tools that you can use, in my opinion, are DeFi Llama as well as Metrics Finance. Now, full disclaimer, I'm the founder of Metrics Finance and I developed this with liquidity mining and liquidity as a service in mind. But the thing is, you should start looking for different opportunities. And then after you find those opportunities, let's just say we select OV into USD Plus. We click on it. We want to take a look at the APY history and kind of see how that changes over time. Make sure it's consistent, at least as of recently. We want to look at the TVL. And as you can see, this TVL has only been growing, which is pretty great. And then we also want to look at the actual asset, because if you never heard of OVN token, you want to take a look at what OVN token actually is and if it actually has potential. So when we zoom out, we look at the chart of OVN token. You can see it peaked all the way over here at roughly $100. And since then, it has seen a huge decline, but it's been pretty consistent with its price over the past basically 60 days or so. These are all things that you need to look at. And you also need to look at the actual fundamentals of overnight finance and say, okay, is this a platform that people actually want to deploy their capital into, or is this just a fad? Is this a token that people might buy up and hype up, but then end up dumping later on? Guys, I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, drop a like, subscribe, notifications turned on. As you probably know by now, we're bringing you the best value in DeFi on this channel. So I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace out.